what form of food do you feed? And everybody was like, primarily canned and kibble. And it was like only 2% were doing other things like home cooking, buying, ready to eat fresh foods. They were, not doing freeze dried. They were doing these commercial things. Now, basically 20 years later, a similar survey came out, which said now 20% of people are using some of these other, we'll say more non-traditional ways of feeding on a regular basis and using it as a primary means to feed their dog. And this is where, the market's exploded.
Hello and welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast brought to you by Wisenetics. I'm Jan Sugodolski, professor here at Texas A&M University, and I'm dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the pet food science industry. So get ready to expand your knowledge and stay ahead with today's episodes. And today's really my honor to welcome Dr. Joe Wakshlag from Cornell University. He's a professor there. He's a very clinical nutritionist and really focusing a lot of diet types, new ingredients, so on. So Joe, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Definitely. You and I go way back.
Exactly. And so it's really great to see, how, they, really going well back and also see over years how insights, right, change. And so that's why today we're going to talk a little bit of, what is actually a good diet? What is that good diet, right? And things like that. But before we start with that, I would like you to introduce yourself a little bit. So I like to, where did you start, where you come from, and how did you the trajectory?
Yeah, I graduated veterinary college over 25 years ago, and figured I was going to be a pathologist. I actually did some training to be a pathologist, and then after a couple of years, I got the itch to get my hands back on some animals, and ended up kind of switching over and doing clinical nutrition at Cornell under Dr. Fran Caulfield, and then did a PhD at the same time. So it took a nice six-year road to getting a PhD and then getting qualified for board certification in clinical nutrition. As you probably know, my interest was always working dogs and we'll just say field medicine to some degree as well. That led me to getting board certified in sports med and rehab as one of the founding members of that college for veterinary medicine. And I think, as you know, the specialties just keep coming, and they will for years to come because we're just expanding knowledge base across all areas, and we need expertise in all areas.
And you also you're also kind of researching new ingredients, right? I think you also can you talk to us a little bit of that?
Yeah, I mean, back in we'll just say my early career, my interests at Cornell were, using ingredients to really help with obesity management, right? Can we improve lean mass by using things like, carnitine in the diet? Worked a little bit with Sharon Center on some cat project that was very interesting related to carnitine. Looking at whether protein helped with satiety to some degree, looking at fiber matrix for satiety. Those are all, we'll just say, these industry-driven projects to really better understand best obesity management. And then I realized after all of it, it was a lot about calories in, calories out, and controlling owners, right? Food is love, and so that's always been the real interesting part. And I think I'm just waiting for the Wegovy's and the Ozempics to make it to the human, or to make it to veterinary medicine, where we can actually start saying, oh, there's a medicine for this, and just so we can take away some of the guessing game on appetite and owner love.
And also, we're going to maybe come back later a little bit, but you're also researching cannabinoids, right, in companion animals, and you're also a chief medical officer for one company in this area.
Yeah, I'm a chief veterinary medical officer for Elevet Sciences. I also consult for a couple of pet food companies, the Farmer's Dog, as well as Animate. And that's where I get a lot of my knowledge about the ingredients and quality of food, and trying to get people to understand that, that just because chicken's the number one ingredient doesn't make it a good food, right? That's what a lot of people think is, if I see real meat, the reality is that it's the entire package.
Benefits consumers want, partnerships you need. Schooler is your all-in-one partner for an innovative pet food supply. With an expansive portfolio and global access, we can source and deliver in-demand ingredients year-round. Schooler provides access to ingredients that are animal and marine ingredients, nutrient-rich, clean label, plant-based, freeze-dried, sustainable, MSC and Marin Trust certified, and more. That means you can offer on-trend products consumers want without disrupting production. Learn about the benefits of working with Schooler. Visit schooler.com/pet. That's SCOULAR.com/pet.
So we're going to try to cover all of this. And before maybe I forgot something. Since you mentioned working dogs, right? Sporting medicine. I also just read that there's a huge announcement that there's a new Cornell Center. You want to talk us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's we'll just say, part of the advancement of veterinary medicine is geriatric wellness, right? Just like you and I, our dogs are living longer, and people want to be able to integrate different treatments, modalities, nutrition. So we developed this wonderful partnership to really try and advance geriatric medicine rehabilitation with Nestle Purina. So they're going to be helping sort of grow our center at Cornell at the sports medicine and rehab department. So it's been a phenomenal partnership. We've already gotten a couple of interesting things out there related. My partner in crime, or really the primary person, is Chris Fry. Dr. Fry has done some really great geriatric evaluations where we can actually put a metric on how well a dog is doing when they get older. So it's great.
That's amazing. Great. So I think what we want to try to start a little bit, obviously, dog food is quite of a, emotional topic, right? You said before, food is love,
Yeah.
So what is your, over the last 20 years, how do you see, how people see food, especially commercial food, right? And where do we start? Now it's all those new kind of foods. And so what is your thinking about that?
Yeah, I just, there's some great old publications, right? Where back when I got in 2006, they basically did surveys of huge numbers of people saying that only 2% were doing other things like home cooking, buying, ready to eat fresh foods. They were, not doing freeze dried. They were doing these commercial things. Now, basically 20 years later, a similar survey came out, which said now 20% of people are using some of these other, we'll say, more non-traditional ways of feeding on a regular basis, and using it as a primary means to feed their dog. And this is where, the market's exploded, right? You've got freeze dried raw, you've got gently cooked, ready to eat. And, back in our day as vets, I remember, 10 years ago, I was always like, I don't know about those foods, right? Because what I know is what I know as a vet. These companies are out there. They're doing their due diligence. They're really doing a good job of putting together a different way to feed your dog. If you want to feed them, we'll just say, human grade, as they like to call it, just stuff that's made in the kitchen, hypothetically. It's considered, we'll say, clean feeding, right? Now whether that's 100% legitimate, is it's going to make your dog live longer, we don't know. But we'll just say sometimes it just makes some good common sense that if you have complete and balanced dog food and you put it in a fresh form, it's more digestible. I think we can all agree that usually the digestibility is better, and that's the real benefit, is that you have lower fecal volume. And you're the expert in dysbiosis. So, are we creating, dysbiosis, and what does that look like? And I think that's an all important stuff to be looking at.
So do you think this is is it actually really health driven, science driven at the moment, or is it a lot at the moment driven by consumer demands? And we're trying to kind of at the moment, trying to figure out, because from my perspective, a lot of people ask, what is the best diet format, right? Is this the right question to ask? Or
The big question is this the best diet for my dog? And it's like, well, there's so many factors. What's your lifestyle like? Can you cook in your kitchen every day? Can you actually remember to thaw out a package, right? You know, it's different for every person, and I think there's great diets in all categories, and things that I firmly believe in. I mean, I formulated some of them, so those are the ones I have most faith in because I know what's in there and every single day. I've got some faith in a lot of the big companies, particularly when it comes to therapeutic diets, that have proven track records, right? And that's what's important for us as veterinarians. But I think what's driving a lot of people's emotion now, right? It's the emotion of, I want to feed this kind of a diet, this freeze dried product that's ready to eat. Um, they're great ways to feed, don't get me wrong. We just need to suss out what those benefits are. I mean, we already know digestibility is likely better for some of those things because they're not processed, and the processing that happens tends to decrease the digestibility. So I mean, that piece is there, but is that the most important thing? Depends. Coat, eyes, urinary tract health, you name it. Every dog's different.
Can you maybe just maybe take a step back, and for those who are not really familiar with all those terms, is just maybe briefly describe the major differences between, for example, a freeze-dried diet, like a kibble diet, a wet diet, and what some of the fresh food diets. Just it's going to be difficult, but a basic overview maybe.
Right. And I think, we talk about, kibble diets and how are kibble diets made? They're made with, we'll just say powdered, rendered meat product. Typically, they'll add a fresh meat slurry in there of some kind. They use dry ingredients. This all helps with stability and shelf life. That's why we've done it for as long as we've done it. You make that into a kibble, so it gets put through an extruder. It's some not really high temperature, but temperature enough to cook it, and then get it, put into that kibble form. It's air dried. They tend to spray fats on it, things of that nature, palatants to make it more palatable. We talk about, things like canned food. Well, that's not much different. It's just put into a can, but it's wet. So now microbial growth is a problem. That's why it needs to be sealed. And that's why, you have a dented can, don't use it because it could be broken the seal. We could get microbial growth. From veterinarian standpoint, those have always just been safe. So we love them, right? And now it's like, well, okay, can we take it into other arenas like the freeze dried, right? Tends to, not be a high heat cooking process. Some people are doing it raw. Some people aren't. Some people are putting it through better sterilization procedures now, which is great, which opens up the market. And then we have the ready to eat fresh, right? The companies are doing their due diligence to make sure that they don't have microbial contamination. They're complete and balanced, batch to batch is efficient and the same. So, it's like now the world is open to the consumer to feed what I feel are safe diets across the board, depending on their ethos around how they like to feed. And so, it's really taking off, which is interesting. And then, of course, as nutritionists, it just creates more and more for us to know, try to understand each brand, try to get information. So it just makes our life just tougher.
Just one thing, the freeze-dried diets is kind of a new concept. So how do they work? What is the freeze-drying process?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically almost an evaporative type of technique where they just take out the moisture and then leave it as dry. It's just as dry as a kibble is, so it's really stable,
Okay.
right? And so that's really the nice process is that the attributes are, they say that, well, it hasn't been cooked at high temperature, therefore it is better. I've yet to see any really good literature showing digestibility is this much better on freeze dried. And I think we need that data. And I don't know if you've seen it. I know you're a GI guy yourself, right? We've seen that on the fresh, ready to eat side. And so then it comes down to the nuance, right? Of, well, okay, if I want moisture in a food, I go canned or ready to eat, right? If I don't care much about moisture, I'll have to add water to kibble or add water to the freeze dried. And usually it's recommended to add water. So it really comes down to, we'll just say, ethos around feeding, as well as the idea that maybe you're escaping some of the things in processed food, right? If you go freeze dried and or to ready to eat fresh. And that's all based on data that's starting to emerge to say that there are less of these things called advanced glycation end products or heterocyclic amines, which just happen naturally. We cook our food. I go out to the grill, I make a steak. I am creating heterocyclic amines and AGEs, and that's part of what actually makes a steak taste pretty good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm creating these are in our food chain, and people are starting to emerge with epidemiologic evidence and mouse models to suggest that chronic exposure to those leads to some issues with inflammatory diseases, right? So we'll call it inflammaging. We have more inflammation in our bodies due to these things that kind of, we'll just say, pseudo accumulate and actually activate receptors on some of your immune cells that make them a little more active. So is that true for the dog? That's what we have to understand to really understand whether this is going to be a beneficial way of feeding. Are we decreasing inflammation? Are we improving, longevity? I mean, that's the end goal is just, we've already shown that in kibble. If I just feed you the right amount of food instead of overfeeding you, you live about 2 years longer, right? Now we have to understand, is this truly a better way to feed? And I think there's a lot going on right now that, in 10 years, you and I will be talking about whether it does or doesn't.
Are you aware of any long-term studies? Because in the end, I think those have to be proved epidemiologically, but also ultimately a prospective study that really, shows it long-term.
Yeah, actually, I've got a colleague at Cornell who's working in a dog colony of, we'll just say 2-year feeding, 3-year feeding of older dogs to examine not only the longevity, but also the accumulation and tissues and whatnot as they pass of some of these things, looking at inflammation in organs. So, it's a long haul, but it's 3 or 4 years away.
No, I think this is really an exciting area, and I think we're learning a lot. I think we also have probably better ways of assessing health in general, right? But again,
Yeah,
long-term studies are needed for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
Let me change or add actually onto it a little bit, because you're also looking at novel ingredients, correct? So what is for you the most exciting area? Where do you think we should go? Or, there's probably a lot of things, but tell us a little bit about your research in the cannabinoids, for example.
Right. I think that's really kind of interesting. And we'll use cannabinoids and hemp as an example, right? Boy, there was a lot of outrage I think it was almost 2 years ago, where California said in some of their regulations that you could add hemp or hemp seed to food, right? Then we'll say the officials at the American Association of Feed Control officials said, well, you can't do that. And then California said, well, if we make it and distribute it in California, we can. You have jurisdiction over whether I can actually market it in every other state. But if I do it in California, I'm good, right? So then there was a big thing like, well, this is not an approved ingredient. There's no ingredient dossier for hemp in general that has, cannabinoids in it. And we know that in the food chain for, livestock, we don't want to put it in there for poultry because, there's possible contamination of milk and meat with cannabinoids, and that could be, detrimental hypothetically. So of course it was never going to make it into livestock, but they're like, well, pets, we don't eat them. So why not provide that potential therapeutic benefit in foods? And so then that becomes an issue where, the Center for Veterinary Medicine has to have an opinion, and they're like, well, we don't like the idea, but every state's allowed to do what they want to do, hypothetically. And I'm not so sure anybody at California has ever gone and made a food with hemp. But let's just talk about hemp seed, because hemp seed is now being used as an agricultural feed, right? It's been approved by AFCO to put into poultry, right? So laying hens can actually eat hemp seed meal. There's been actually benefits with omega-3s, higher protein.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the research behind it and what are the benefits?
Yeah, and we all talk about trying to get eggs with higher omega-3 content in them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hemp seed's a great way to do that. It's a byproduct in a lot of cases from the hemp industry, whether you're using it for textiles, building materials, for cannabinoids and extracts, etc. And so hemp seed's a really great nutritious protein source, but it took, I think, 5 years to get that dossier through AFCO to approve it, when you and I can go down and pick up hemp seed anywhere at any health food store and eat it tomorrow. And this is where this whole regulation of the pet food industry is so much more stringent than even our own food supply chain as humans. And so people say, oh, pet food's not safe, and it's made badly in this way and that way. The reality is safety in pet food is probably far superior to the safety in our food. I mean, we see more recalls on a weekly basis in our own food chain than we do in the pet food world. So,
ICC Animal Nutrition, a Brazilian company with 30 years of history and present in more than 70 different countries, providing natural, sustainable, and technological solutions for animal nutrition, health, and well-being in a safe and scientific way, adding value in food production and helping to feed the world.
But from a regulatory point of view, I mean, we can go to a health food store, right, and buy it. So what is kind of the range of qualities, or where do you see kind of like a little bit the benefits, right, but also the potential, the limitations of because of not enough regulation, right? Because I mean, we know this with other supplement nutraceuticals that sometimes that the quality is not the one that it's supposed to be, right? So
Yeah, I mean, if we head into the whole nutraceutical realm, which is, that's kind of, we'll just say outside, we'll just say it's a supplement. So now it's not part of food, right? So it's not part of the food chain, it's not part of AFCO. There are so many supplements that are out there that are just fly-by-nighters that just throw something into a product. They don't do any science. They just say, look, mine has omega-3s in it. Mine has, CBD in here. But how much is in there, how much gets absorbed, all these are things we will love to know as veterinarians to say whether we think this is helpful, because we get the questions every day. Does this bottle, is it going to help my dog? Who knows, right? Is it regulated in any way? No. We at least have a National Animal Supplement Council, which as a supplement company, we can become part of, and we pay them to audit us. We pay them to actually, basically put our adverse events into their adverse event reporting system. They come, they scrutinize your records, they make sure you have what you say you have in your product. And this is where we'll just say it's just so hard. I mean, pet food, I feel much safer about. Nutraceuticals, I don't, because you can go down to your local farmer's market and pick up any kind of juju oil that you want, or any kind of treat that's got Boswellia serrata for joint. It's got curcumin for joint health. It's got ashwagandha for anxiety control. But understanding that delivery and whether it actually has enough in it to actually have a medicinal effect, because a lot of these things do have medicinal effects, yet we can't even label it as a medicinal effect because it's a nutraceutical. So I can't say it's for arthritis. I have to say it's for mobility. It's for immune health, right?
So you published like almost like 16 manuscripts on the use of cannabinoids in companion animals. Can you kind of tell us a little bit? So what is your data show, and why are you excited about it, and how do you see the future?
Working with the company that I've been working with, Elevet, is that it was nice to get on board at Cornell University. They came to us and asked us in 2017, could you run a study on pharmacokinetics, and can you run a study on what you think the dose would be in dogs who have mobility issues? So we did the study. We showed that there are some interesting responses. And to be honest with you, compared to a lot of other studies I've done, I was extremely interested. I said, wow, I've got people coming to my office crying and saying, this stuff was amazing. I don't know what you put my dog on. And I'm like, I hope it's not the placebo, because then this is the worst placebo effect ever. After we got done with the data, it was like, yeah, that we were really helping some dogs. That kind of led into, other studies of pharmacokinetics across species. It's a very science-driven company. And that's what's been the joy of working with them, is because they're like, what do you want to do? I say this, this, this. And they say, okay, do it. And so you don't get that at every company, right? And then it's like the literature's come out now, and I like to say to people, I've got 6 positive papers now for CBD for dogs with mobility issues. You ask me about a couple of the drugs that we use as veterinarians, I'll tell you we have 0, right? So we use them. Why not use this nutraceutical? But people are a little scared of it still, because it comes from a cannabis plant, and there's a lot of regulation and a lot of history that makes it a difficult nutraceutical, right?
It's time for our famous 3.
ProAmpac, your companion in pet packaging. Visit pets.proampac.com to explore our innovative sustainable solutions, such as our QuadFlex recyclable flat bottom bags, ProDura polywoven bags, ProEvo recyclable paper bags with grease resistance, and our proactive recyclable film and pouches that run at optimum speeds on your filling equipment. Elevate your wet food, treats, and kibble brand by utilizing packaging that safeguards and preserves product freshness. Trust ProAmpac for packaging that cares for your pets and the planet. pets.proampac.com.
What are the current challenges with the regulation, and do you see the future changing, or do you think it's going to stay for the next 5 to 10 years like very difficult?
Yeah, I think from a regulatory perspective, it's perfectly legal to distribute hemp products, every state has pretty much adopted the USDA's guidelines for hemp growth, production, and shipping and whatnot. What I do say is that I expect to happen is that the hemp bill from 2018, which got revised a couple of years ago, which is now being revised again, is going to start to pull the reins in on how much CBD can be in an extract, and therefore limiting it, because there are issues in the human side where they don't like to see too much CBD being consumed due to sterilization in males and reproductive issues, which are where the big problems are more so than anything else. And so whether that's going to translate down to animals, I don't know, because Congress often forgets about animals. They're more concerned about you and me.
But do you think the future is going to be bright, at least from the science? And once the science is strong, I think things going to fall in place.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting in the next few years where, somebody will make the time and investment to do a FDA approved product at some point, right? I mean, I see that being where things will probably head, but you'll still have the nutraceuticals out there, and whether the price point for a new FDA approved drug is going to be something that pet owners can afford, or whether they're going to look for that other alternative. It'll be an interesting journey in the next 10 years to see what happens.
So that brings us pretty much to almost the end of our podcast. So I usually always like to ask one more question, and that probably is almost like a follow-up question, what you just said, right? What keeps you exciting, right? I mean, you said you're doing this for 25 years and you see a trajectory, but so you definitely see new avenues on the horizon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, I think the reality is the exciting part is that it's an ever-changing landscape when it comes to feeding pets, right? There's always a new ingredient. There's always a new nutraceutical that somebody needs to investigate, wants to investigate. And of course, that's where the industry partnerships come in, because they're the ones that want to fund it. I can't run off to very many granting agencies and say, hey, I've got this wonderful new devil's claw extract that I want to study. There's not a lot of funding agencies that'll fund work like that. So it's usually just this industry driven. And as long as people are above board, I think you and I both, it's like, listen, I want to do the science. I want to do it right. I'm not here to prove whether your product works or doesn't work. I'm here to give you scientific data. Mm-hmm. And there's just as many failures in that arena that we never publish data on versus the ones that are positive. They're like, yeah, we'd love for you to publish this so that we can, develop a product. I mean, I've enjoyed that part because I think I've made a bigger impact than those arenas than I have with my cell culture data that I thrived on in my early part of my career.
Great. So I'm sure we're going to still hear a lot coming from your lab in Cornell. And again, congratulations on this new center, right?
Oh, yeah. No, thank you very much. And yes, congrats to you all too. And expansion of the GI lab out there.
Thank you so much. So that concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented to you by WiseNetics. So thank you again for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and feedback so that we can plan for other episodes. So until next time, this is Jan Sogodolski from the Pet Food Science Podcast signing off.